Hi, welcome to You Belong Here, the place to be for positive stories of immigrant women from all around the world. I am Porcia Chen Silverberg. I run a multimedia social enterprise that nurtures a community of immigrant Americans and their allies through positive energy, flaming optimism, and authentic stories so that we can all live happily ever after right here, right now. My favorite project is this show where you're meeting inspiring women sharing their successes, challenges, and how they are living meaningful American dreams. I hope you will be inspired to share your stories, live your own American dream, and live happily ever after. My guests here today are Angel Rampy and Larissa Robideaux. Angel is an executive coach building healthy and happy relationships in the workplace. She is passionate about working with foreign-born professionals as well as multicultural teams. She brings her own experience to her work as an immigrant from the Philippines who had her own challenges acculturating to the American workplace. Larissa is the Executive Director for Center for Excellence in Nonprofits. Larissa has over 20 years of business experience and a master's degree in public administration from San Jose State. Larissa and her parents immigrated to the U.S. from Ireland. A second-generation nonprofit leader, she believes that commitment to quality services empowers the people served and the community as a whole. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So excited to have you here. Thanks for joining us. And I'm so excited because both of you are such experts in your fields. And for people tuning into this show, I am really confident by the end of the show, they're going to pick up at least one good pointer or tips from you to help them become more adjusted and really feeling a sense of belonging, because I think that's what we all strive for. And we'll start with you, Larissa. I think when we first talked and we met, I of course love the work you do at CEN. It's a great organization. And I had a misperception, I think, I'll confess, that Larissa's white. I didn't even think of you as an immigrant.
Yes.
So I was really surprised when I found out you were from Ireland. And then my second assumption, we should never assume, I know, but my second assumption was, oh, she speaks English perfectly, fluently. I'm sure she had no issue, no problem acculturating. And, I'm sure you instantly became an American and life was grand.
Right.
But that's actually not true.
No.
So tell us about that.
Yeah, so my family came in 1976 to the United States. I was about 4 years old. My father and mother grew up very poor in Ireland. They were sheep farmers and very poor farming families. And my father had been very involved in social justice and the civil rights movement that was happening in the late 60s.
Wow.
In Ireland, Catholics in the north were very discriminated against. And so he became very involved. Long story short, very long Irish story short, we ended up coming to America. He had been here a little bit before, and we came to San Francisco. And we had a lot of advantages. We were white. We spoke English. The reason we spoke English was that in Ireland, Gaelic, which is the native Irish language, was outlawed. And so you were forced to learn English. Well, all these decades or a century later, that was an advantage for us coming to America for sure. My mother didn't understand the money when she came. They had $600. They knew nobody.
Wow.
And it was definitely scary for them. They ended up living in the Tenderloin for
Gives me courage.
Yeah.
It chills. It's such courage.
Yeah. They lived in the Tenderloin for a little while, and my dad did work in a parking garage, and found his way after a couple of years. He did have a degree, so that helped. Got into nonprofit and started running a tiny little nonprofit in Chico, in Paradise area.
Oh,
and
wow.
that's kind of where it started. And then we actually moved to Massachusetts, and I ended up living in a very small town that wasn't very friendly to immigrants. And when they discovered that we were not from the area, they felt that we were taking jobs. I was 12 years old, and
how long ago was this?
this was in the 80s. I was 12 years old, and we had people that were saying, your parents are taking jobs from our parents.
Wow.
My father went to a town meeting, and he was called a carpetbagger.
Oh,
so so as this was happening, and there was lots of wonderful people too that were very good to us, but as this was happening, it was definitely something that was impressionable on me. And my two best friends in this little town, one woman was from Bahrain and the other was from Ireland. So we were three immigrant girls that just kind of hunkered down together.
Wow.
And it definitely built character, and it built an inner strength, but I have always had to fight that feeling of not belonging. And I still, to this day, I'm a nonprofit CEO, and I have to remind myself that I am invited. So that's kind of my story.
Yeah, you keep giving me chills because that's remarkable. Thank you for sharing that. What about you, Angel? You had a different path.
I did. I actually came here after my adult years, so right after college, right after my first job, right after college, I was working for a beer company. So I literally was training up where the factory was, and you know, we would take breaks and we would pour the beer from the bottom up and have our beer. And I met an American citizen who was actually Filipino Chinese, and we got married, and he wanted to come back to California. It was heartbreaking for my parents because we were 5 children. And, you know, the fear of letting me go and going to another country was a little bit, they were very cautious about it, I would say. And I was excited, actually, coming to the United States because in the village I lived in the Philippines, we had a lot of expats that lived there, and I got the chance to you know, have friends who were Americans. So America was always something I was excited to be part of and come here. It was much more difficult than I thought.
Wasn't exactly what you thought, huh?
I remember the first drive was, we were picked up at night, and driving to Burlingame was where I first... And seeing the little houses, and in the Philippines they like to be big grand houses, and I went, oh my gosh, they live in little boxes. But that wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part, I think, for me was in realizing how different I was. And even I remember being in tears because I would say something and they would all laugh, and they would say, oh, that's a real cute way of saying it. And I never really want to be cute.
Yeah, you weren't trying to be cute.
No, I wasn't trying to be cute. And
like what? What's an example?
Just even simple things like I say paprika, and they go, that's not the way to say it. Or, you know, this is the one word my Filipino friends and I share, like the word percentage. We say percentage, you know, and everybody say, that's not the way to say it. And I had a friend who was Filipino, and she was doing finance. She said, I literally had to stop before I said that word because I was so nervous about what they would say. So there was that. And I think just the sense of community was different for me, being, you know, raised in a family of 5 children. We're very family oriented. We're always together, and seeing more of the individualistic. There's more individualism in the United States than there was the community. So that was very difficult for me. And also just working, there was a little bit different ways of, you know, the different. I was so used to the hierarchy, and I remember there was a job opening, and it was in Japan to do some, and I was in human resources for a technology company, I was doing administration, and they were going to send someone to Japan to handle a startup, one of the company's extension, and they didn't choose me. And I thought, why didn't they choose me? Because I'm Asian, I would have fit there.
Right, right.
And I remember talking to my boss about it. It's like, why didn't they choose me? And she said, well, you never asked for the job. And I thought, oh, that was a little different from my culture. If you work hard,
You made the assumption
you
that
made
they
the
would.
assumption that that was, and there was a lot of things that I was very happy. I had some people helping me out through the experience of working in the United States. Like, I would go in a meeting and I'd be the only woman, and they'd turn to me and say, "You're going to take notes." And I remember one of my bosses saying, "She is not taking notes."
Wow, good.
Yeah. And
good.
so, but it was, it was very different for me to understand that I had to take my stand and I had to speak up. And those were all very difficult lessons for me coming to this country. And I'm also missing my family.
Your family, right, right.
Yeah, being so far
And
away.
the only person you knew then in Burlingame was your husband.
Well, his brother was there, but I did find out I did have a very long distant aunt in Burlingame. I was so excited to connect with her.
Wow.
My father finally found some aunt that was in Burlingame.
Wow.
Actually, she was married to one of my father's long relatives,
Okay.
so she wasn't direct blood, but
Right.
we
But
treated
they're
her like
aunts. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. What about you? Did you end up finding an Irish community?
So we did a little bit. My mother had 8 in her family, and my father had 5, and so all of their children and the aunts and uncles are in Ireland, except for one brother. My father had a brother in Philadelphia, and so when we lived in Massachusetts, they lived in Philadelphia, and we spent as much time connecting as we could. And in Philadelphia, there's a huge Irish community, so we would tap into that as much as we could, and it helped. Yeah.
So it did help.
Yeah.
And that's something I'm always curious about, because my own experience was I grew up in Denver, where there really wasn't much of a Chinese community, and I was born in Taiwan. I was made in Taiwan. So I grew up in Denver, where it was also a white community. So I really didn't have as much connection with Asians, I don't think. I mean, for a brief while, we belonged to a church, and it was a Chinese American church. But really, my network or my circle of friends were all white Americans. So for me, they felt like my community. And I've talked to lots of different immigrants who have found that for many of them, they have found comfort to really just have their own ethnic community. But at some point, I feel like that becomes maybe a detriment, because then they end up staying in their own ethnic silo and don't break out. So that does not help with feeling a sense of belonging with mainstream community, right? You may feel like you belong when you're hanging out with your own people, but we're all Americans. So right? And that's why I stress that it's important for immigrants to come together with one another, but also to be in community with our allies, because we have to do this movement together. We have to be a community together, right? So both of you, so that's why I'm curious, you really did not have a Irish community right where you lived.
Yeah.
And you did not really have an extensive Filipino community where you lived.
Not exactly in Burlingame.
Right.
I did have an aunt in Pacifica who's actually my dad's sister. And it was always, for me, I wasn't driving, learning how to drive there, so it was always difficult to get to her.
Yeah.
But you are right. A lot of times people will stick to their own culture, and what I found myself doing was quite the opposite. I did, I did enjoy the connection. I still do. I go into a Filipino restaurant or bakery, and I speak in Tagalog. They always they look at me like, what?
It's so confusing.
You speak that language, you know?
Yeah.
So I love to do that and surprise people. So yeah, I enjoy that, but I really, really made it an effort to connect with, especially when I started working, you know, really connect with folks and get to understand the culture. And that's where I think I got a lot of mentorship, you know, people mentoring me or telling me this is the way we do it. My mother-in-law, because in my second marriage, my mother-in-law is American, and she taught me a lot. Like when you go to somebody's house, you bring a present.
Right.
Like I did today, right?
Yes, you did.
So we
Thank
did
you.
like a little present, you know, and all that. So that was, there was a lot of people who mentored me along the way.
Right.
And when I work with foreign-born professionals, it's not unusual for them to say, I never get invited to people's house, or, you know, that's, or they'll say, oh yeah, we should get together, but they
Then it doesn't
never
happen.
kosher.
They never follow up.
And I always say, don't wait.
Yeah.
Invite them to your
That's great
home
advice,
and
yeah.
let them
That
get
is
to
great
know
advice.
about
So
your
that's advice number
culture.
one.
That's good, yeah.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Don't wait to be invited.
Yeah.
Yes.
Invite yourself, or you
Yeah.
create
You
the
invite
invitation.
them to your home, and you know,
Invite them into your home. Right.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true. That's
Yeah.
true.
And California is a special place. I mean,
It is.
when I compare California to the East Coast, where I, you know, went to high school and middle school, I know it's not perfect here, and I know there are issues.
Absolutely.
But it is open to different people on a whole nother level, I think, than anywhere else. And I know my mother used to say that they, you know, they were very discriminated against in Ireland for being Catholic where they lived. And she said when she came to America, there was this feeling of hope. And there was this, you know, she knew it wasn't perfect, but she knew that you had a shot. You know, the dream was there. They really believed in the dream.
Right. Yeah, and I think I asked you before the taping of the show that what does the American dream mean to you? And I think, you know, we all believe in the American dream, I think. But I think everyone may define it a little differently. So I would love to hear your dreams.
Yeah.
American dream.
You know, there was a lot of independence that I was really craving for, and I think the American dream was providing me that independence.
Yes.
And I did learn that if you worked hard, and I almost had like a 6-month rule that I had to learn something every 6 months.
Oh, wow.
And that would help me get to where I needed to go in my career or my profession.
Nice.
And that was probably for me a way for me to build my American dream, to actually, you know, find myself in a job where I could get a promotion if I spoke up.
Yeah, right.
And ask for it, right?
Right.
So, so I learned how to do that, and I think that to me was the American dream for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really nice. And for people who don't know how to be independent, or, you know, do you have any suggestion?
I would say for people who are struggling with independence, to get to know that there are people, I always tell them, there are people that will support you.
Yeah.
There are people, all you have to do is ask. And there's always that, in many cultures, you know, to ask for help is probably not something that we do easily.
That's true.
Right?
That's true.
So that's something I think that's one of the things, is just to ask. You might get a no, but somebody else will say yes.
Right.
You know.
That's good.
And I have to say, I had some really great bosses that said yes and would help me out. You know.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing I love about the U.S. I think there is such a spirit of generosity and helpfulness, and you know, I just really believe most Americans are just so big-hearted and warm and welcoming. And of course, now we're in an era that sometimes we may not feel quite as welcomed as immigrants, and you know, the word immigrant doesn't exactly evoke a warm and fuzzy feeling right now. So I'm curious, when you were going through that difficult time in Massachusetts, what were some of the things you did that helped you get out of that feeling, or just feeling more empowered to become who you are today?
I give that credit to my parents, and in particular my mother, who is a very independent woman, and really would remind us to know what our worth was and to use our voice. And it wasn't always easy, but she would constantly tell us that, and that it was okay to do that. And then I had some mentors also that were very helpful, and my father was extremely, I give him a lot of credit because I was a young girl and he was always saying to me, you have a right at the table like any man, like any, you can think, you know, very effectively, don't put your gender in front of you that way.
Wow.
So both of them are really good in that way, and I think it was very helpful. Yeah.
That
Didn't mean I always
fantastic.
still felt it naturally.
Right,
But like
right.
we know, our parents' voices, we carry them with us.
Yes.
And so that implanting that kind of thinking is very powerful. To say, you know what, you do have a right to speak your mind. It's a powerful thing. It's a great gift to give your children if you can. Yeah.
And that's why I also kind of encourage people to serve as volunteers in their local community, right? Because usually, especially in the boardroom of nonprofits, these are leaders, these are influencers who are able to serve on a nonprofit board. They are welcoming, they're big-hearted, and in order to be in that room, to be at the table, I find that there's just so many opportunities that's outside of your, you know, regular work situations or whatever. You get to be volunteers together with other leaders who are native-born Americans. But I have found that a lot of immigrants actually don't understand how volunteerism works. And Larissa, you as the CEO and the leader of CEN, which is a coalition or organization built to serve nonprofits, do you find that, have you had a lot of leaders come through the Leadership Institute or other programs who are immigrants? And are they comfortable in speaking up? And are they raising their hands to be, oh, I want to be a donor. I want to be in that boardroom. And I really want to, you know, interact with the mainstream community and you know, make my voice heard and actually be at the table.
It's very rare.
Right?
It's very rare nationally.
I didn't think so.
And it's up to us. That's part of what we talk about at CEN, to really invite people to the table, and that our boardroom and our staff and our classes, they all have to look like our community. And they're not there yet, but we are definitely working on it. And yeah, you're so right.
I know we've talked about this in the past, and that's one of my passions. I love nonprofits, and I love local nonprofits. Local nonprofits are just so key to every community. They are serving where they live, where people are, but so often people don't understand them or don't know about them, so they struggle to recruit diverse board members, or they struggle to fundraise. So it's thanks to people like you who are so engaged with the nonprofits that you're serving, when you are throwing home parties or whatever, you know, it's really helping to spread the word too. And Larissa, I would love to, you know, continue our conversation about how do we work together to bring more immigrants who are completely qualified to be at the table, especially the nonprofit board table. Right?
Yeah. And I think two pieces of it that we're discovering in our journey is that we have to look like we're open.
We do.
We have to communicate that we're open, but also we have to go out into the community and be present in areas that maybe we weren't before. And it really is a conversation. It really is a safe, trusting conversation, and amazing things can come from that. But a lot of times nonprofits either don't have that time or it hasn't even crossed their mind maybe.
Or even if they have thought about it, they just don't know how to go about it, right?
They don't.
Because they usually recruit from their own network. And so as we're winding down, I want to get maybe a couple more tangible tips from you for people who may want to start doing more civic engagement or community service. Do you have any suggestion? How did you find, you know, the organizations that you serve? And I know you serve on boards too, or have in the past. How did you find out?
I think one of the things for me was to start small, which is to get into the boards, and even if you played a small role, and to to get in there, because your voice is so important for whatever organization that you are part of. In that board, you bring in a different flavor, a different approach, a different perspective that I think adds value to the organization. So start small, you know, do some small volunteer work in the board, you know.
I agree.
And then after that, you could actually start seeing what are the next steps for you, what's the next opportunity for you, and don't be afraid to ask.
Yes.
You know, I've been put in positions in the boards where I say, that's not quite what I want to do, but I want to do this.
Exactly.
Can I do that instead?
Right.
And so far, I've been in boards where people say, yes, go for it. You know.
Oh, nice.
But you do have to ask and start small, and then get to know your board and get to know your foundation or whatever, wherever you're volunteering a little bit more.
I love the reoccurring theme. You gotta ask.
Yeah.
Raise your hand.
Yeah.
Right. If you're not invited, you invite them in.
Yes.
So really stand up, speak up, be
Yes.
seen, be heard,
Yes.
belong. Ah, my
Yeah.
taglines. I like it. But that is what it's about.
Yeah.
So what about you, Larissa?
I would say everybody brings with them experience, as you were just saying. Well, you know, whether they bring it from the country of origin that they're from, or maybe their parents, or their work experience currently. But find out what that specific topic is, or find out the nonprofits that work in that space.
Right.
Maybe it's something that your family specifically experienced, and you're very passionate about it. And all you have to do is call the nonprofit and say, I would like to volunteer.
Right.
And many times nonprofits, they already have a system in place, and you make great friends, and you get to know so many people. There's always a little sub kind of community around that nonprofit.
And volunteering, even without being a board member, I find that it's a good way to kind of check one another out, right? Because there's so many different types of nonprofits. And as we wind down, I am so sad. I want to keep talking. There's so much to gain from you.
Thank you so much.
And,
Thank you.
Such an
I would
important
love
topic.
to have one little quickie, any quick myth you want to dispel that people may not know about? Just
I think one of the things, the myths there, just because we speak English doesn't mean we're totally acculturated. That there's
Perfect.
still some things we're working out in being acculturating in the United States, and not to take that for granted.
That's great.
When you
you,
immigrant.
Larissa?
That we still want to be invited.
Aw,
Yeah, that we still need to be
Yes.
invited.
Thank you. Oh, those are so great. Now, Angel, Larissa, and I would love to hear from you. We talked about so many interesting things. I'm curious, what's one thing that resonated with you, and what actions are you inspired to take? What's your story? Please leave a comment below. Let's continue the conversation. You Belong Here Foundation is committed to infuse a plethora of positive stories of immigrant women and ignite meaningful conversations in our community. I'm Porcia Chen Silverberg, and I am from You Belong Here Foundation. Please tune in to future shows, and thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lustful, a living celibate. Whether you're an optimist or only see the negative, whether you're dead broke or rich from inheritance, doesn't really matter, we're made of the same sediment. Whether you got a family or single parenting, or you're Asian, African, European, or American, whether you pray to God or atheist is irrelevant, cause what you got inside is the same as all your preference. Troubled and the homeless. Can you say everywhere you are is where your home is? Sharing your heart in the dark just like a lotus, letting your light shine bright so you can float it. Everlasting love of grace like those did Jesus, Muhammad, Krishna, Buddha, and Moses, who carried the weight of the world.